So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Victoria will take over. As I mentioned, Victoria Arthur is a social worker at Eastern Suffolk BOCES, and she's going to share with us some of the different resources that she really likes and that can be used with all of our students, and then also for teachers as well. So I think I stopped sharing my screen, right?
Yes.
Are you, Victoria, able to share your screen when you're ready?
Yes. So hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. And thank you for giving me an excuse to put on a real outfit, at least from here up. So thank you for that. And again, this is just, I know you guys have been doing a lot of social emotional learning stuff already, so I will touch upon what it is, why it's important, but the real meat and potatoes of today will be mostly just some resources that I've even come across most recently that I found to be really helpful, and also lay down groundwork for creativity, as teachers are very good with. So without further ado, and don't mind all the open tabs, they will be used. I also imagine that's kind of what the inside of my head looks like these days. All right. So this is just a quote that I feel like it's something I grew up with, and of course at the time I didn't want to hear it because it was coming from my dad and I was a kid and didn't care. But I do think it's really very relevant to what we're going over with social emotional learning. Obviously everyone here is here because you're a stakeholder in academia. So while there are some answers that can be looked up in the back, you're also teaching kids how to be human beings. And there's not exactly a rule book for that, as much as you would like for that to be. So I thought that was always a really nice quote for this topic in particular. So this is just, not to do a whole Psych 101 lesson, but this is a model that I think is really important for anyone in the education system. It's a Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, and the reason I like it so much is because it looks at children and everyone involved in the picture as part of multiple systems. So there's a lot of layers to everyone we come across, and it looks at them, how they interact with each of those circles. So you can see in the middle, it's individuals and peers. So that's family members, that's friends, that's teachers. And it works its way out into the bigger picture, the micro, meso, and macro levels of the world we live in. And I think this model is really important for what we'll be talking about today. And I'll kind of refer back to this type of model throughout the presentation. So I'm going to pull up a quick video that I think does a really good job of explaining and painting a picture of why social emotional learning is important.
What?
Well, I want to start with a story. I want to introduce you to Josh. He is 8 years old. He's a third grader. We all know Josh. Last night, his parents had a conflict. They were yelling and shouting. Voices were raised. Josh had a very hard time getting to sleep. He had an even harder time waking up because of all that commotion. So to get him up, his mom yelled at him again, "Josh, get up, we're late." So Josh got out of bed, got dressed, ran. He got breakfast made for himself and his sister, and he ran out the door to catch the bus. He's running and running. The bus is right there. He catches up to the bus. The bus almost leaves, makes it on board. The bus driver says, "Josh, sit down. Let's go. We're almost late. We got to go. Come on." Made the bus, gets to school. He realizes that he maybe forgot his cold lunch, so he takes some time on the yard to dig through his backpack and notice if he has his cold lunch or not. He had it, so that was good. But he wasted some time, got through the front door, and the front desk said, "Josh, you're tardy. Get to class. Let's go." So Josh runs down the hall, opens the door, and the teacher says, "All right, welcome to class, Josh. Do you have that homework from last night?" Josh completely forgot about the homework with all the commotion going on at his house. Josh, at this, kind of had a tantrum. He threw his backpack against the wall, and he screamed, "Ah!" The teacher said, young man, that is not how we enter the classroom. I'm gonna march you down to the principal's office right now. Sits Josh down at the principal's office, and the teacher says, I don't know what's wrong with him. I don't know what's wrong. He went from 0 to 10 in 5 seconds flat. The principal looked at Josh and said, what's wrong with you? There's two things with this that I want to kind of reevaluate. The first thing is, it's not what's wrong with Josh. It is what has happened to Josh. And the second thing is, Josh didn't come from 0 to 10. He was at an 8 when he walked in the front door, right? So we're going to shift our mindset from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. In that story, how many adults along the way were living in the what's wrong with you mindset? The mom, the bus driver, the front desk. How much easier could Josh's morning have been if instead they were operating under the what happened to you mindset? Just think about that.
So I'm going to switch back over. So I just thought that was like a really nice kind of soundbite to kind of bring home the idea of why this is so important. We've all experienced mornings like that personally. We've all seen our kids come in with an off morning, and we see that one snapshot. But it's really important to continue to think about those layers, those circles of involvement in the kid's life and ours. You know, we've all come in, I call them coffee spill mornings. You're a hot mess. You might have spilled your coffee on your clothes. You don't have time to change. You're trying to hide the stain. You're running late. There's a million and one things that could happen before you walk in the door. And that's part of your story. So what is social emotional learning? Again, I know you guys have been over this recently, so I won't get too much into it. Developing self-awareness, self-control, interpersonal skills that are vital for school, work, and life. So the breakdown of competencies, we have self-awareness, that's identifying emotions, accurate self-perception, self-confidence, self-efficacy. We have self-awareness, that's learning perspective, learning empathy, appreciating diversity, respect for yourself and for others. You've got decision-making, so identifying appropriate decisions, identifying how to approach problems and think critically about situations, reflect, understanding ethics as well. We have self-management, so that's the impulse control. That's definitely a big one for our kids. Stress management, being able to self-discipline, not just accepting discipline, but understanding your role in that. Goal setting, organizing, and then relationships. That's communication, our social engagement, relationship building, and teamwork. So that's the basic breakdown with a lot of buzzwords that we know really well, but not necessarily buzzwords that kids really want to hear. So it's our job to kind of hide those lessons discreetly. So again, I really like this image because I think it does kind of mimic the Bronfenbrenner model of circles of influence. So it's all connected. There's not just one piece that presents itself. It's all part of this layer of who we are and who our kids are. So I think it's always really important to revert back to all these layers of our kids and how it affects them. I did borrow this from the Michelle Obama documentary I watched recently, and this whole thing about your stats versus your story. And I think it connects really well to the social emotional piece. An example of our stats would be, how well did you do on a test? How well did you do in a sporting event? Whereas your story is, what are your parents like? What's your home life like? And I think that's another way to kind of revert back to that, what happened versus what's wrong with you. So why is it important? Just take a second and think about your own educational experiences. What stood out to you when you were growing up about your education? Was it that calculus class that you took, or was it the teacher that taught the calculus class? So we are part of that. We are part of the educational experience for our kids. No matter what your role is in that building, you are part of it. And we know that if you're happy in a place, you're going to perform better. That's academic success, job readiness, improved relationships, overall well-being and emotional intelligence. Kids spend most of their days in school, and we're all part of that. And you're definitely you're more willing to engage in a setting when you feel connected to it in some positive way. So that's always important too. So who is involved? Teachers, teachers' assistants, individual aides, admin, social workers and guidance counselors, OT, nurses, students, families, absolutely everyone that is sets foot in a building or is involved in a building is a stakeholder. So it's not just on the teachers, not just on the principals, not just on the social workers to carry this out. It is a team effort. And we all know that consistency is very important in yielding success for kids. So we're obviously in a very strange time right now, which is why these kind of brain trust conversations are even more important than they usually are. So these are just a few things that I know I've personally seen, I know my colleagues have seen as well in terms of remote education and that switch and what it's been like. So first of all, you don't have the physical space of your classroom. You don't have your posters, you don't have their cubbies, you don't have their folders. All those tangible things that make a classroom are not there. And that's a huge adjustment. You spend so much time making that space comfortable and safe and engaging for yourself, for your staff, for your kids. And that's not there. And that happened very quickly. So that's a huge thing that we're dealing with right now. The interactions, that back and forth of give and take, of learning, of conversing, of socializing, that's not there. And for staff too, one of the beautiful things about working in a school is the sense of community. It's a little community there for that block of your day, and that's significant. The separation of work from home, that's a big one. I get dressed to go to my living room for work every day. That's not a separation. So that's really significant. And we're always taught, compartmentalize and make sure you don't bring your work home. But as teachers and educators, I know we all do. So that's missing too. So we are forced to also deal with not having that distinction of our lives, of our circles of influence. Those circles that I've talked about earlier in the presentation, those are blurred lines now. There's no concrete separation, and that's a big deal. And with that comes a new kind of fatigue. We're not necessarily fatigued right now because we're running around like headless chickens dealing with childcare and work and home. We're fatigued because there's that big outer circle, the community is dealing with something big right now, and we were forced to adjust. And everyone we interact with is dealing with that in their own way, but they're dealing with it nonetheless. And that with it brings a new sense of fatigue. The ambiguous timeline is another significant aspect. Media exposure, the news, the memes, you name it, COVID's everywhere. Whether it's funny or entertaining or something more serious, it is something we're seeing, it's something our families are seeing, and it's something our kids are seeing. And it's difficult to get away from. We have access to all these things at our fingertips. And we're managing something different. Typically you're managing classroom behaviors, but that's no longer what we're managing. We're managing the stress of all these things up here. And it's new, and no one was ready for it. So what we're seeing now, again, and it's important to acknowledge that a lot of these things, a lot of these bullet points were already issues for the families we serve. Lack of basic resources, hardships across the board, across major domains, difficulty with new mental health issues. Maybe this has brought on anxiety, depression, or maybe people already have pre-existing conditions and they're being exacerbated by this horrible situation. And new responsibilities, the financial hardships, people are out of work, and that creates a huge chain reaction in our communities. And a lot of our students are dealing with similar stressors to their families. They're feeling these effects, the access to those resources, the trickle-down effects of the medical, financial, and emotional hardships. Maybe some students are taking on some new responsibilities because of that trickle-down effect. Lack of socialization. They don't, a big part of a kid's socialization is who they attend school with. That's a huge part of their day. And limited access to direct educational emotional supports. So yes, while we do have remote learning, not every child has the luxury of access to it. And that's something that we have to unfortunately be aware of. And again, all this is happening with this new COVID fatigue that we're experiencing. So these are all the smaller circles in the bigger circle of there's this global pandemic that we are all experiencing in our own way. Again, not to do a huge psych lesson, but this is something that I've been kind of reverting back to a lot. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. So typically we strive for up here. This means that everything down here is established and we are building on it, and we are at the top, loving life and striving for morality and creativity, and we're problem solving critically, and we are just living it up. Right now, we are seeing not only in ourselves but also in our communities that we are struggling with being down here. So what does that mean? It means that being a teacher and being a student are even more difficult than they were before. So some things we're anticipating that we will witness in ourselves and our students when things do return to normal. It's going to be hard to engage in the content. There's going to be that residual fatigue, and it's not like riding a bike where you can just easily get back in. It's hard to return to the educational demands after not really being engaged in it for a long time. And it has been a long time, and it will be a long time. Social regression. So these kids, whether they've been able to interact with their peers through a screen or not, it's not the same. That interaction, that back and forth has been lacking. So it's possible that we will witness some social regression in our students as well.
Hey everyone, I hope everybody.
That fatigue, again, it's okay. The residual fatigue, again, because of all these things, while we physically haven't been moving around as much, we are emotionally exhausted, and that is more powerful than any sort of physical fatigue. Inattentiveness, again, that difficulty engaging and being a full-time student again. We might see some presentation of new mental health symptoms, exacerbation of the existing mental health symptoms. And it's possible we may see some cases of PTSD. This is traumatic. And there are some kids that will struggle with resiliency in this. And that's where we come in. And it's not to say we're not dealing with it either, because I'm assuming that a lot of these things sound familiar, not just for our kids, but for ourselves as well. And that's really important to acknowledge that we are in this with them as well.